Welcome to my budget deck channel, where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. And obviously, new pack means new deck, and I had a look at the deck that I liked the most, art style wise and actually gameplay wise as well, which is the whole punk deck. Some kind of Japanese style with new modern, new punk kind of whatever stuff mixed in. Is great artwork, and also has a very unique, I would say, play style. Obviously in Yu-Gi-Oh! Unique playstyles aren't as unique as in other card games they might be, but this one is a pure variant and therefore has some pluses, some very negative sides to it. Let's go card by card and see what we can do with this specific variant. First of all, Ash Blossom, most people have it, that's why I don't count it as an ultra rare, and hand traps in this deck are genuinely very helpful. So if you have stuff like Infinite Impermanence, I'll definitely recommend you splash that in. In a control deck, these kind of hand traps are usually better than most single trap cards that you could run, because it helps you go in second and it helps you go in first, whether trap cards most of the time only help you go in first, and so on. So hand traps are genuinely better than most trap cards. I run all of the level 3 tuner monsters at 3, you kind of have to, because otherwise you don't really do that much. I decided against playing certain extenders though, because this deck is still lacking 3 support cards. I think 1 synchro monster, the field spell, and a level 5 monster, which a level 5 monster is actually quite important for certain strategies and certain engines basically. So I thought till this comes out, I won't splash in too much, I won't make it too crazy. I will make other deck variants, because I already have 1 or 2 ideas that what you could be doing with this deck as an engine rather than as a pure variant itself. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. This card in general quite nice. Fusion summons your fusion monster, which you run 2 of. If you just want to trial this deck out and you don't want to spend so much crafting material, you will get away with running 1 fusion monster. But the problem with this is these cards you technically want to be playing at 3. Same with the synchro monster, but these are ratios that work. You can play with this without losing out too much. And if you like it, might as well open more packs, or since they're not really in a secret pack, and you can't get other cards from the master packs, might as well craft them. Other than that, I think 2 fusions are more important than 2 synchros, but you can go either way if you feel like it. This card is quite nice for, well, fusion summoning, because you don't have a fusion spell, but also the effect can come up going into your synchro monster during your opponent's turn, but I wouldn't count on it being the main usage. Next up is the Spell Trap Searcher, which is technically the worst searcher, but has the best second effect, because if this card is targeted, or, well, Punk Monster I think is targeted for an attack or by a card effect, then you can draw 1 card, which is very neat. And the spell traps aren't too bad. For the ratios with the spell traps, I'll just talk about them now in conjunction with the actual searcher. I run 2 of both of them. You could technically tweak the ratios as much as you like. I feel like the destroy an opponent's monster by battle, well, by card effect, but before battle is actually the better one. So I could see this maybe being played at 3 and then just searching the other one out. But the 2-on-2 ratios felt a bit better in the few testing games that I actually did. So I left it at that, but if you want to tweak the ratios, feel free to do so. The other card, if your opponent targets 1 of your punk monsters, you can target 1 card on your opponent controls and destroy it. Would have been super nice if it banished, but I mean, yeah. You take what you can get. Also, the cards have effects if your opponent destroys them and basically stall a bit more. 1 I think makes your monsters not be able to destroy by battle, the other one by battle and card effect if I'm not mistaken. So they're balanced around this kind of thing. So running multiple in the deck kind of makes sense, but also doesn't, because technically your opponent doesn't really want to destroy them, but since the payoff for destroying them isn't actually that great, yeah, they might. So I felt like running both at 2 actually did stuff, because they are somewhat crucial for your actual game plan, which is stall your opponent and annoy them as much as possible while you plus and reduce your own life points. Next up, the Trap Card Searcher, which is quite neat, obviously, because the trap cards are a big part of this deck and actually do very much for this deck, especially because you +1 every single time. The other effect isn't too good, so you can have to put your opponent's monsters monsters attack till the end of this turn even, which is Would be better if it was forever or something like this, but I mean, you take what you can get. The trap cards itself, though, are pretty good, and I'm quite happy this card exists because this is an effect negation trap that doesn't require your opponent's monster to be special summoned or any other kind of thing. For a normal rare, so you could technically play this card in any other control budget version as well, but it has a nice effect if you control a punk monster, and which is that you gain the life points of the negated monsters, which is quite neat since you pay a lot of life points, and you can basically, by getting 2000 life points, you can pay for another like 3 turns, which is insanely good, or other 3 effects for that matter. And the other card is destroying a set card, or if you control a punk monster, you can target one face-up card and destroy it instead, which is very neat because you can get rid of every kind of thing that your opponent throws at you. Just one of it though, obviously we're not popping the whole field or multiple cards, but for a searchable trap this is actually quite nice, and I like it at 3. If you want to switch the ratios, that's fine. I feel like this card is more versatile in what it does though, because it works against all kinds of decks unless your opponent's cards cannot be destroyed by a card effect, then that's a bit annoying. But if your opponent doesn't really play an effect heavy deck or something like this, then this trap isn't as helpful, so I felt like running this at 3 actually made sense. Since they're only once per turn, you technically could get away with playing both at 1 or even just at 2 if you like to, but I actually liked having them in my starting hand because that's kind of the aim of the game. But these kind of cards are easily replaced by hand traps, and then just running one of each would be fine as well. Next up to the more expensive one, which is the Monster Searcher. Who would have thought? This card is actually neat and not neat at the same time. This card becomes a lot better once the level 5 monsters are out. For now, you'll be mainly searching one of your level 8 monsters to be able to put some damage on board actually, because your level 3s, who would have thought, are quite weak actually, and then go into your Synchro plays, for example, because you kind of need level 8s for that one. That's basically all the card does. It boosts your monster by 600 attack if it's sent to the graveyard, which can make a difference sometimes, but you don't even get over 3000 with your monster that you mainly will be searching, which is Foxy Tune. I'll skip the Kaiju because Kaiju basically going second helps you, and if your opponent has a monster that you cannot destroy, then you can be screwed in the grind game. Maybe you live long enough to actually draw your Kaiju, but you could also replace this with any other card. Run triple Foxy Tune because this card summons from deck, which is a bit annoying because you sent one card from your hand to the graveyard, which you can have some payoff with. Certain cards you could be playing in your deck that plus off of this technically if you like to. This is where kind of also stuff like Virtual World comes into play. You could mix this deck very easily with a Virtual World engine, or play a Punk engine in a Virtual World deck, because their cards have actually quite a lot of effects in the graveyard, so the discard doesn't matter too much. Plus the whole level 3 thing comes into play. They're mainly psychics, so that's also quite a nice kind of thing to do. That's why I decided to run triple Lost Wind, because this card also does stuff in the graveyard. You could technically play P.U.N.K Paleo if you want to, because you will be plussing on trap cards anyway, and if you do this with the Paleos as well, you can really annoy your opponent while keep plussing. Paleos don't really have normal summons, so this is fine. They don't lock you into anything, so there might be a P.U.N.K Paleo deck coming up soon on this channel, so stay tuned for this if you're interested in it, if I actually make it. But yeah, the effect of the card is also nice, running cards over by battle. If you keep your opponent on the down low with effect negations and stuff, they usually don't have too strong monsters on the board, and then you can refresh your life points over and over again, which can end up being quite neat. I decided to only play one of Overdance. You could bump it up to 2 or 3 if you like, so if you want to spend the super rares or already have the card if you like, then yes. I think the effect of the card isn't too helpful. It searches you any of your level 8 tuners without having to discard anything else, which is great, but the problem with it is it doesn't do much else but that. It can still special summon itself. You could technically run 2 of this and 2 of this if you like, and so on. There's ratios you can tweak all the way you want them to. Whatever feels most comfortable for you is what you probably should be playing. I felt like this was the kind of version that I wanted to go for, but if you want to tweak the ratios, that is also fine. Monster Reborn helps you get your extra monsters back, helps you get all kinds of stuff back. In this kind of deck, in the grind game, Monster Reborn is actually a massive plus, because your monsters that you get back all plus again, so in the end this card can be very helpful. Plus you can yoink some cards from your opponent's graveyard, which might make the difference in OTKing your opponent from time to time, because this deck lacks damage for sure at this specific variant. Already talked about the spell cards. This is, in my opinion, the better one, but they both do their job, I would say. One card I would definitely run in this deck because it does help you building up an advantage a bit easier, makes your deck a bit weaker, even more weak, I would say, against Ash Blossom. So if you have Called by the Grave, a card you could consider possibly. Emergency Teleport, very nice. Sadly a super rare, but I'm already glad it's not an ultra rare, to be completely honest. If it goes up to 3, I'll definitely play 3 in this deck as well. It's not even once per turn. The problem with this card is, in this specific variant, you actually do not really want to combo off that much, but since it can summon the Monster Searcher, it doesn't really matter that much, because in the end, if you would banish it during the end phase, then you can still search Foxy Tune or the other one and summon tribute the Ammon and actually summon it, so like it doesn't get banished in the end phase, so it doesn't really matter that much. But the other ones, you would have to have some kind of way of using them, either for synchro summoning, fusion summoning, or whatnot. But even just for the monster one, this card is actually pretty strong. Forbidden Chalice helps you go in first, helps you go in second. It's genuinely a very good card in budget decks, but obviously easily replaceable by hand traps. Torrential Tribute, a card in this deck that I'm not 100% convinced about. It can really help you in the grind game because you won't have a massive field presence usually. So losing one monster technically isn't that bad, especially if your opponent somehow gets rid of it and then you nuke them with Torrential Tribute, completely end their turn, then you can start building up again. Obviously, if you then can't put another monster on board, they will steamroll you over the next few turns because, well, you know, that's how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is these days. So this can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It can be really helpful in the grind game, really helpful to end your opponent's turns, but also can screw you over a few times if you don't happen to draw into another monster or have another monster that does stuff in your hand, because you kind of do need punk monsters on board for most of your spell trap cards effects. Lost Wind at 3, could run it at 2 if you want, but with the discard effect, it's actually not even too terrible in hand, and it slows your opponent down quite a lot. Sadly, it only works on special summon monsters, which is quite annoying, and it can only set itself if your opponent special summons from the extra deck, which is also quite annoying. So if there's a card that you don't feel too good about while playing it, this is definitely one that you could tweak with a little bit. Paleozoic Dynamiscus can be helpful. Another card that you could consider is Dogmatica Punishment, because like you see with the 7-card extra deck, and most of these cards don't really come up anyway, this deck isn't too extra deck heavy, even though both of the ultra rares are actually their own extra deck monsters, but they're not mega ultra crucial to their strategy, at least in a pure build. So technically you will be okay with not summoning from the extra deck for a turn, and then sending stuff from your extra deck to the graveyard to basically destroy one of your opponent's monsters for free without having to pay an actual cost, like for example with Dynamiscus. Helps the deck enormous in the grind game, and you could even combine it with playing stuff like Ecclesia, playing stuff like the Dogmatica fusion monster to search stuff in the end phase and so on. So in the grind game, this card would come in handy as well. So consider Punishment. I didn't go for it now, but it's a very considerable card to play in this specific variant. One Solemn Judgment, because you can activate it at any life point count that you add. Problem is, if you draw it at the start, lowering yourself to 4,000 life points can be very problematic, since you have to pay a lot of life points. In the grind game though, this card can actually save you on multiple occasions, so I did want to include it, but you don't have to, because it has an actual downside in this deck. A lot of decks don't really care about the life point cost. This deck at least somewhat does. For the extra deck, the fusion monster is nice, but it can be Ash Blossom the effect, so watch out with this, because this can really end your turn and really screw you over. So use with caution. The Synchro monster is very neat. Sadly, only bounces cards on your opponent's field to the hand, but if you can make it be, well, attack double with using your fusion monster for it as a material, then 6,000 damage income is quite neat, especially because you bounced off cards in your opponent's field possibly beforehand. So this is nice. Also, it can get you stuff back from the graveyard, not only your fusion monster but also your other level 8 monsters for even more damage, which can assemble an OTK. You already see this card with double attacking and bringing back one of the 2,000 and something attacker point monsters would be a clean OTK if your opponent has no cards, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sadly, you can't use the bounce effect and their summon back effect at the same turn, which makes sense, I guess. Otherwise, it would be very, very, very strong. But yeah, it is what it is. There's no other synchro monsters, even though this deck runs loads of tuners, because you only run level 8 and level 3 monsters, which means you can only go into level 11 tuner synchro monsters, and there's not any cheap ones. So I didn't want to include any more. But obviously, if you add certain cards, some people play like a red layer, for example, and any kind of materials, that then you can go into level 8 synchros and whatnot. But obviously wanted to keep the deck very, very cheap, and these synchros are never cheap. So this is why there's not much of these white cards in this extra deck, even though there probably could be. And for the Xyz monsters, it's just rank 3 good stuff, basically. None of them do very much for this deck. Cards you could be running is this Virtual War card, for example, or Cicada King, which I think you could get through these legacy packs. So if you have this, splash it in. It's a good card for the grind game, but a lot of the time you kind of want to keep your P.U.N.K monsters on board, so it doesn't really matter all that much. Anyway, hope you like the deck profile. Like, subscribe, do what all these other YouTubers tell you to do, but most importantly, hope you have a good day.